So now we're going to start John chapter 5, and this is about the healing of the man at the pool of Bethesda. That's kind of what the title is. That's what's going on here. And just to get some things straightened out, remember what we talked about, that the word Beth means house. Well, this is Bethesda, and it means house of mercy. And there was a pool that had 5 porches. So, verse 1, after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. So here's another thing you want to think about. That when it says there's a feast, it doesn't tell us which one, but when it says there's a feast at Jerusalem, now you know that city's going to be packed with Israelites. All the males had to go, and some of them would bring their families or their wives or whatever. But this is what's interesting, that a lot of times when Christ is doing things, it's at feast days, and it's like, that's convenient, everybody's there. Verse 2. Now there is at Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in the Hebrew tongue Bethesda, having 5 porches. And, you know, I've told you before about what numbers mean. Some numbers get repeated so often in the Bible that you can see that God is making a point with numbers, like the number 40. Well, this number 5 comes up a lot too. And if you're keeping track of what these numbers mean, the number 5 always indicates grace. Okay? So verse 3. In these, that means in these 5 porches, lay a great multitude of sick folk, of blind, of lame, of the paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and stirred up the water. Whoever then first, after the troubling of the water, stepped in was made whole of whatsoever disease he had. So there's no reason to think other than it's just what it says. That for this time, this would be a miracle. This would be a divine healing for whoever that person was who got into the water. But in verse 3, it says a great multitude was there. So these people were there all the time. They're like, maybe I could be the first one. Maybe I could get healed. So there was a bunch of sick people. It was like going to a hospital. Think about it. All these sick people gathered. It says a great multitude. And the thing is, in that day, people thought that if you were sick, it was because you had sinned. So they thought these sick people, they're a little bit less than us. We're holier because we aren't sick. So they kind of had this judgment thing going on. And in verse 14, I'm just going to skip to this. It says, when Jesus talks to the man after he healed him, he said, behold, thou art made whole. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come unto thee. So people think that it was because of his sin. But when we get to that verse, I'm going to show you that, in my opinion, it wasn't. Verse 5, and a certain man was there which had an infirmity 38 years. That's longer than Jesus was even on the earth. This man had that disease 8 years before Christ was even born. Think how long he had settled into that life. I don't know how long he'd been at this pool. I don't know how long this had been going on. This whole event of the angel is not happening today. It didn't happen later on after that. But this man had gotten used to that life. Think about it. He probably had to beg most of the time because you can't work when he couldn't walk. So, plus he really wanted to get to the water, but he didn't have anyone to get him there. When Jesus saw him lie and knew that he'd been there a long time in that condition, he said unto him, will you be whole? Do you want to be healed? Now here's the thing you got to understand. He doesn't know who Jesus is. So just somebody comes up and says, do you want to be healed? Well, he doesn't know that Jesus can do that. He's a complete stranger to this guy. So it makes sense what the man's answer is. The man says, Sir, I have no man when the water is stirred to put me into the pool. But while I am coming, another steps down before me. So there may have been steps too. Think about being lame and there being steps to get to the pool. I mean, this is going to be hard. And he says other people had friends, so this guy didn't have friends. And I want to read another incident of Jesus healing a man who is paralyzed. This is Mark 2, verses 1 through 5. And straightway many were gathered together, insomuch that there was no room to receive them. No, not so much as about the door. And he preached the word unto them. And they come unto him, bringing one sick of the palsy, which was born of 4, meaning he had 4 friends. And what they did was they took the tiles off the roof, and they let him down. And when they could not come nigh unto him for the press of the people, they uncovered the roof, and when they had broken it up, they let down the bed wherein the sick man of palsy lay. And when Jesus saw their faith, not the faith of the man, the faith of the friends, he said unto the sick of palsy, Son, thy sins be forgiven thee. And he ends up healing the guy. But what I'm trying to show you is that that guy had friends. This guy's got nobody. There's another passage, let's see. Mark 6, 53 through 56. Okay, this is another healing. And when they had passed over and came unto the land of the Gennesaret, and drew to the shore, and when they were come out of the ship, straightway they knew him. The people knew who he was. They'd followed him. And ran through the whole region round about, and began to carry about in beds those that were sick. See, they all had people to help them, right? That's why I'm reading these stories, to let you know in these other cases, these people had a way to get to Jesus, where they heard he was. And whithersoever he entered into villages or cities or country, they laid the sick in the streets, and besought him that they might touch, if it were but the hem of his garment. And as many as touched him were made whole. So this guy is in a whole different thing. He's got no one to help him. So he might be thinking, hey, maybe this guy can hang around and take me to the pool. Because he says, I have no one to take me to the water. And so then Jesus responds to him, Rise, take up thy bed, and walk. And immediately the man was made whole, and took up his bed and walked. And on the same day was a Sabbath. That's going to be a great big story. And the first thing he told him to do was to take up his bed. So this man was obedient. He did exactly what Jesus told him to do. First, he got up and picked up his bed. You know what that meant? He wasn't ever coming back there. He didn't say, just go leave. Then his bed would be there. He said, pick up your bed and walk. And that's what he did. And that was an indication that Christ was giving him that you're done with this place now. He gave him hope and a healing. But you got to understand that the people of this era really looked down on these people. And it probably would have still been hard for this guy once he got into the Israelite society, because they knew what he had been like. And, you know, it's just hard to just, boom, be there and try to make a living. But when Christ came to heal this man didn't know who he was. This man didn't have any faith. You see? A lot of times Christ will say, your faith has made you whole. This guy didn't have any of that. But Christ healed him anyway. Now, he could have healed everyone in the porch, but he didn't. He healed this guy. He wanted to heal this guy. And what we're going to see what happens in the rest of this next week. This whole incident, this whole big, huge upheaval that happens because this happened on the Sabbath, gives Jesus an opportunity to tell people exactly who he is on this day that is such a public event, and everyone's attention there is now focused on him because he's the bad guy that did the healing on the Sabbath. You know how they are. And so anyway, we're going to talk about that next week.